Okay, we might get started. So welcome everyone to the Immunisation Catch Up online webinar. Okay, I'd just like to start with the acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and hopes of Aboriginal Australia. So if you have any questions throughout the session, please pop them in the Q&A, not the chat, the Q&A. And if we have time, we'll try to answer these at the end. I know I had an issue last time that the Q&A wasn't working. I'm not entirely sure. I've double checked it today, but it is set up so you can enter questions there. But if you still can't, you're welcome to email me, amy.thompson@brisbanenorthphn.org.au with any of the questions, and I can forward them on to Michelle and we'll get an answer back to you. We would appreciate if you can complete the evaluation form that should open up when you leave the session, just to ensure that we continue to provide relevant information for you guys. I also just wanted to put a disclaimer in because I know we have got a lot of interstate nurses that have joined today. Just be aware that each state does have a different immunisation program governed by their state public health unit. So the information provided today by the Queensland Health PHU may not be relevant to people attending from the other states. The information provided at this webinar is specific to Queensland. Am I correct there, Michelle?
Yes, yeah. Oh, yeah, I do talk about sort of as a whole, but yeah, definitely.
Definitely to Queensland. We do recommend that you check with your local state public health unit for localised information. So I'll hand over now to Michelle, who's a clinical nurse at the PHU. Over to you, Michelle.
Excellent, thanks, Amy. I'll just share my screen. With you all, hopefully the slideshow will load up. Okay, is it looking okay for the minute, Amy?
Yep.
Perfect, excellent. So yes, thank you everybody for joining us today. If as we're going through the presentation you do have any questions or anything that you think you want to clarify, I'm happy for you to stop, but otherwise, as Amy mentioned,
we might get started.
Or if there's any that we can't get to you, we'll
so welcome everyone to
and get back to you. So today we're going to talk about what's new, so just some updates from the handbook and other information that you may or may not already be across. We're going to talk about some recommendations for vaccinations for preterm infants, talk about adverse events following immunisation, and then vaccine storage and cold chain management. So just in terms of some updates, you may already be aware that the PBAC made the positive recommendation to transition from Zostavax to Shingrix on the National Immunisation Program. So that's sort of as much information as we have at this time, but noting that the Queensland Health Immunisation Program is aware that this will probably occur before the end of this year. So I'm sure that sort of as information comes to hand, it'll be shared with you guys about that transition. There is already some information, as you probably know, on Shingrix in the handbook. So it is a 2-dose schedule, and because it's not a live vaccine, it can be given to immunocompromised patients. And there's also information currently in the handbook about people who might have previously received Zostavax and the recommendations for future doses of Shingrix, as well as people who have had previous episodes of shingles as well. So more information will be shared, as that sort of transition happens. There's also been some recent changes to the pneumococcal chapter in the Australian Immunisation Handbook. to include information about the 15-valent pneumococcal conjugate vaccine and the 20-valent vaccine that have recently been registered by the TGA. They're not currently NIP funded, but again, watch this space for further updates. We have been getting a lot of calls about HPV and obviously the recent change to the schedule in that people up to 26 years of age only require 1 dose. So just a reminder there. So if you have somebody who's 17 years old who presents, who had 1 dose maybe in year 7 a few years ago, that is all that they need. They don't need any additional doses. The only exception to that is if they're immunocompromised, they still need to have 3 doses. In addition, you've probably heard as well that they've expanded the registered age for Gardasil 9, so it's for males 9 up to 45 years to bring it in line with the female registered age group. Again, it's only funded as part of that catch up until 26 years of age, so up until they're 25 years until their 26th birthday. And then again, anybody over 26 years needs 3 doses still. As well, the information that's been provided that pharmacies will be eligible to administer NIP vaccines from January 2024, so next January. And then also, because we've had a few calls about it recently as well, just a reminder that influenza and COVID vaccines can be given on the same day. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of information about the vaccination recommendations for preterm infants. All of these slides are from, the next couple of slides are all from the Australian Immunisation Handbook, and it has a specific section for the recommendations for preterm infants. So what is preterm? So premature infants born earlier than 37 weeks gestation, and then extremely preterm infants are born at earlier than 28 weeks gestation. And it's important to note that they may need additional doses of some vaccines to optimise their protection against particular diseases. So of note, pneumococcal and hepatitis B, they require additional doses. And then we'll just go over influenza and rotavirus. And as I said, there is a section dedicated to this in the handbook as well. So for pneumococcal vaccine, if you have a child that's born earlier than 28 weeks, they're recommended to receive 4 doses of Prevnar 13 and at least 1 dose of the Pneumovax 23. So the Prevnar 13 is given at 2 for an additional dose at 6 months and 1 dose at 12 months of age. So it's just that extra dose at 6 months of age, which you can see on the schedule highlighted in purple. And then in addition to that, they get the Pneumovax 23 at 4 years of age, again on the schedule highlighted for medically at risk. The second dose of the Pneumovax 23, or a second dose of Pneumovax 23, is required 5 years later, so that's 5 years after their dose at age 4, if they identify as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, or they have a chronic medical condition. Otherwise, they don't need that second dose of Pneumovax 23. So in terms of hepatitis B vaccine, again, this is outlined on the schedule. So low birth weight and preterm infants don't respond as well to the Hep B containing vaccines. So for a low birth weight, so that's any baby who weighs less than 200 grams at birth, and any infants born at earlier than 32 weeks, regardless of their weight, are recommended to receive a Hep B vaccine at birth in line with all babies. The 3-dose course of Hep B vaccine at 2, 4 and 6 months, again in line with the recommendations for all children. But the additional recommendation is obviously a booster dose at 12 months of age, which is indicated again, outlined on the schedule. So you can do the booster dose at 12 months of age, which is sort of how it's written and preferred in the handbook. But there is also an option for you to measure their antibody titers at least 4 months after that 6-month dose that they have. And depending on the titers, they should receive a booster dose if they're less than 10. And that booster dose needs to be given at 12 months of age. So it's really, if they're coming in for their appointment at 12 months of age and you note that they're low birth weight or less than 32 weeks, please just give them a booster dose of the Hep B rather than trying to arrange any serology at that time. So again, yeah, outlined on the schedule there. And then in addition, so there's not really anywhere on the schedule that talks about infants born to Hep B positive mothers. But the recommendations for them, which is outlined in the immunisation handbook, so we want them to have a birth dose of the Hep B vaccine and a dose of Hep B immunoglobulin. And we want that to be as soon as possible after birth, so usually ideally within 12 hours. And then those infants need to go on and receive their 3 subsequent doses at 2, 4 and 6 months of age to complete their primary course. So that's in line with babies not born to Hep B positive mothers, so the same dose scheduled there. But in addition, we want them to have testing done 3 to 12 months after they've completed their primary course to make sure that they're protected against hepatitis B. So we want them to have surface antibody levels of greater than 10, and we want them to be Hep B surface antigen negative, which rules out any current infection. So that information, as I said, isn't on the schedule. It's certainly in the handbook, but if you know of any mothers that are Hep B positive that have given birth, please make sure that the GPs are arranging follow-up blood tests at around that sort of 9 to beyond, usually at least 3 months after they've completed the primary course. So influenza vaccine, just purely for the fact that preterm infants can have higher risk of complications from influenza. Just a reminder that it should be offered, recommended for all children, but particularly if they're a preterm infant, and it can be given from 6 months of age. If they're receiving an influenza vaccine for the first time, they need to have 2 doses 4 weeks apart, and then 1 dose every year after that. So children who receive 1 or more doses in a previous season only need 1 in the current and future season. So if you have a child who presented last year and it was their first year having the flu vaccine, but for whatever reason they only received 1 dose, that's okay. You don't need to catch that 2nd dose up in the subsequent years. You just give 1 dose each year from then on. And also please double check that you have the age appropriate flu vaccine. So there's so many vaccines available, which I'm sure you guys are all across at the moment and very busy giving them out. But please always double check that you have the right vaccine for the right age group. And for the rotavirus vaccine, there's no additional requirements. It's just to remind you that you don't need to adjust, or that they can be given at their chronological age. You don't need to correct for any prematurity. And again, just a reminder of the strict up age limits that apply. So basically for preterm infants, I've just sort of summarised, please consider their gestational age, their birth weight, particularly if they're under the 2,000 grams, if they were born to a Hep B positive mother, and then as always, any chronic medical conditions, and if they identify as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. And if there are additional vaccines required that we've just gone through for preterm infants, they're all funded on the National Immunisation Program. Okay, so we'll move on to adverse events following immunisation. Amy, I might just quickly stop and just make sure you can hear me okay. You can see the slides progressing.
Yes, we can. Thank you. And I do apologise again, as I said earlier, I checked all the settings and it's supposed to be set up so that everyone can put in questions. It looks like people can enter any questions in the Q&A. but I can't reply. But obviously that's fine. If we get time, at the end, I'll go through the questions with you, Michelle, and then, but otherwise I'll forward the questions on to Michelle and get them back out to everyone with the recording of this video.
Perfect. And Amy, I can only see my presentation. So if there's hands up or any...
No, yeah, I'm watching for that. There's no hands up at the moment.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, adverse events following immunisation. So what is an APHE? So it's any negative reaction that follows a vaccination. It's not necessarily caused by the vaccine. And it may be an unfavourable or unintended sign or symptom, a disease or an abnormal lab finding. And this picture here shows a lovely sort of nice little red arm following, I think that was a meningococcal vaccine. And obviously, as I said, they may or may not be caused by the vaccine, or they might have occurred anyway. So common APHEs, so most APHEs are minor. And the most common that we see or that are reported are usually injection site reactions, and they can include pain, redness, itching, swelling, and burning. They are generally mild and only last for a couple of days. They can at times look quite sort of significant and extend, particularly redness and swelling from joint to joint. We do see that quite commonly, well, maybe not commonly, but more common after a booster dose of diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis. And sometimes it has been confused with cellulitis just due to redness and swelling. And unfortunately, sometimes children have been prescribed antibiotics sort of unnecessarily. So I guess just to be mindful if you do have patients presenting, particularly if it's after a booster dose of the DTPA, to sort of be aware that they can have some significant redness and swelling. Injection site nodules are also fairly common and can last many weeks and even up to months. Some systemic reactions can include low-grade fever and malaise. And it's also really good to know that particular vaccines have some different side effects so that you can let the parents and caregivers know what to expect. So the National Immunisation Program has the following vaccination, what to do and what to expect handout that you guys may not give following immunisation. So it just lets them know what to expect, what they can do at home to manage it, and when to seek medical advice. And also how to report an APHE. There's some really good tables in the handbook that discuss the common side effects depending on which vaccine has been given. Oh, sorry. And then the other table that's really good in the handbook, it talks about the comparison of the effects of a disease versus the side effect of the vaccine for that disease. So sometimes that's quite helpful to use if you have some vaccine hesitant parents as well. So to minimise the risk of APHEs, we want you to make sure that you're using your screening tool each time you vaccinate. There's obviously the pre-vaccination screening checklist in the handbook, or one that your practice might have developed. So it just ensures that the person doesn't have a condition that will increase their risk of APHE or a contraindication to a vaccine. And always important to use the correct needle size, correct injection site as well. And these images are all from the Australian Immunisation Handbook as well. So also in the handbook, it talks about SIRVA, which is shoulder injury related to vaccine administration. And this is usually when the vaccine is given too high, and it can cause some pain and restricted range of movement. So it's really important to make sure that when you're vaccinating, that people are wearing appropriate clothing and that you can expose the entire upper arm so that you can get your landmarks and be sure that you're giving it in the right spot. So anaphylaxis, obviously, this is the most serious of all the adverse events following immunisation. It usually occurs quite quickly after vaccination, within 15 minutes, hence why we always want people to wait for 15 minutes after having the vaccination, but there can be a delayed onset up to a couple of hours as well. Thankfully, it is very rare, but it can also be fatal. All vaccination providers must be able to recognise the signs and symptoms and know how to treat anaphylaxis. It's characterised by respiratory and cardiovascular symptoms and involves also the skin and the GI tract as well. And adrenaline is the cornerstone in the treatment of anaphylaxis. It's also obviously crucial that you have an anaphylaxis response kit available and that it's checked, including the adrenaline being in date before each vaccination session. So this diagram just sort of clearly outlines the different systems and how they can be affected as well. Also within the Australian Immunisation Handbook, there's some tables that help you to differentiate between a vasovagal episode and anaphylaxis, and just goes through the clinical features. And that one. The handbook also has information on how to set up an anaphylaxis kit as well, and has the dosage and administration of adrenaline outlined as well. So how to report an AFI, we still have a separate form to report a COVID AFI. So I have included the link down the bottom, but you can just Google Queensland Health immunisation and you'll pop up onto this page. You can click into AFIs and click this one here to get the COVID AFI form. It is important that all of the AFIs are reported promptly, and then you can just click the email to submit the form, and just ensuring, obviously, if it is a COVID AFI, you can clearly see that you've got the correct form. To report all other AFIs, they all go just on the normal AFI reporting form. And again, you just email it through to the email or the fax at the bottom. And since the introduction of the COVID vaccines, we've also now got a vaccine administration error reporting form. So currently it is still just 4 errors for COVID vaccination. I don't know if it will be expanded to include all immunisations. But basically, if you do know that, or you note that you've made an administration error, whether it be the wrong amount or the wrong vaccine for that age group, if the person has had an adverse event following immunisation, so if they've had an AFI, you still will need to do a COVID AFI form. But if it's picked up and you've checked with the patient and there doesn't appear to be any adverse events, then you still just need to complete, it would just be the vaccine administration error form. And that comes back to us here at Public Health, just to the immunisation email at the bottom there. So I've also just popped this in due to some calls that we've had recently about vaccines that need to be reconstituted. So it is indicated on the schedule with this little R for reconstitution, and it does sort of clearly outline which vaccines need to be reconstituted. If you think that you haven't reconstituted a vaccine correctly, please give us a call so that we can go through that in more detail with you, and revaccination may be required on a case-by-case basis. Recently, we have had a few calls about the Infanrix Hexa, where it's just been the vaccination, the syringe that's been given. It hasn't been reconstituted with the vial. So it is important to know that the pre-filled syringe contains the diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, Hep B and polio components, and the vial contains the Hib component. So if it's not reconstituted, then basically the child is not receiving the vaccine to protect them against Haemophilus influenza B. So please always give us a call if you have any concerns, and we'll talk through the recommendations. Okay, so we'll just move on to vaccine storage and cold chain management. So we're going to talk about safe vaccine storage. So what is the cold chain? So the cold chain is a system of transporting vaccines within the safe temperature range of +2 and +8 degrees. So strive for 5 means the average temperature of the vaccine fridge should be around +5 degrees. That's what you're aiming for. And that allows a 3 degree either side for temperature variations. So the cold chain begins from the time the vaccine is manufactured through state territory distribution centres and ends when the vaccine is administered into the patient's arm. So why do we care so much about making sure they're stored correctly? So vaccines are delicate biological substances that can become less effective or destroyed if they are frozen, get too warm, or are exposed to direct sunlight. They have varying degrees of heat stability and sensitivity to freezing, and repeated exposures to temperatures outside of the +2 and +8 range diminishes their potency. So the effect is cumulative and it cannot be reversed. So ultimately, we want to make sure that you have efficient vaccine storage and management to identify problems early and stop ineffective vaccines being given. So incorrect storage can lead to revaccination. Obviously, there is a financial loss as well associated with it, and potentially loss in confidence in the vaccination program. So if we don't protect our vaccines, they won't protect our community. I'm sure you're all very familiar with the National Vaccine Storage Guidelines, so STRIFA 5, 3rd edition. So that provides all the information around safe vaccine storage, and it also gives you rationales for why they make these recommendations. It's available online and also in hard copy as well. So it was updated in 2019, and there were some new requirements that outlined that domestic refrigerators were no longer able to be used, and that everybody needed to have a purpose-built vaccine refrigerator. And there was also a requirement for the fridges to be continuously data logged as well. And they did update some resources, and there's a lot of appendices as well, which are useful. And just a reminder that you can get these fridge stickers or PowerPoint stickers as well from the Australian Government Department of Health website, and I've just popped the link in there. So it's just really important to make sure that you have the correct signage. For example, if you have a solid door fridge, you might want to consider putting a map on the front of the fridge so that you can clearly identify where the vaccines will be before opening the fridge door. So in terms of equipment and monitoring, it's really important that all vaccine service providers have min-max thermometers. So these are your battery operated thermometers. You need to check them for accuracy with the slush test and change the battery at least annually. You need to have one for each vaccine fridge that you have and for each SV that you have as well. And for data loggers, you can have an inbuilt or external data logger for your continuous monitoring. They need to be downloaded at least once per week or more frequently, depending on your brand of fridge. And you need to be checking for any temperatures outside of the +2 to +8. And if you do report a cold chain breach, we would need that data to be sent to public health to follow up. So thermometers must be checked, recorded and reset twice a day. So this ensures that any cold chain breaches are picked up quickly. And every time you get a vaccine out of the fridge, you should check the min-max and current temps in case something has happened since the last check was carried out. Obviously, if the temperatures are within range, then you don't need to record or reset it. So we want you to plot and graph the minimum and the maximum temperatures on the min-max chart. And it's really important to know your fridge so that you're aware of how to reset and check the min-max and current thermometers. So the STRIFA 5, I think with the update in June, they've released a new min-max chart as well. This is definitely the one that we would recommend because it's got lots of useful information on it, as well as having it color-coded so you know that you want to be aiming for the green. And it can also be downloaded from the Australian Government Department of Health website as well. And this was just an example of how we would recommend it be filled out. So you really need to make sure you're recording the maximum, the minimum, and the current, so all three temperatures, and making sure that you're resetting it. There's also a troubleshooting section on the back. So if you do have some temperatures going out of range, you're able to, for example, on the 3rd of the 1st, 23 at 8 o'clock, we said that the maximum temperature was up to 11.9. We've identified that it was greater than 8 degrees, that's the problem. And because we were restocking for 5 minutes and it didn't go above 12, we haven't taken any action. So that's just really important for the next person coming on to be able to see what's happened with the temperatures, why it happened, and what you've done. So data loggers are small electronic devices that measure the temperatures at a preset time and record those results over a period of time. So all data loggers need to be set to record temperatures every 5 minutes. And it's really important to make sure that yours has the correct date and time stamp and that it's recording in degrees, not in Fahrenheit. So we want the data logger to be co-located in the fridge with the min-max thermometer so that we don't have huge variations in temperature readings. So as I said, you need to download your data logger at least weekly or more if your fridge requires it. And also if you have any concern about a breach or you've got any other concerns about your fridge temperatures. It's really important that the twice daily min-max temperatures are recorded, again, as a timely alert to any cold chain breaches. And also you need to ensure that all staff are trained in how to operate and manage the data logger and interpret its readings. So maintaining equipment, you need to make sure that your fridge is serviced at least every 12 months. And in terms of your data logger, recalibration as per manufacturer guidelines, a lot of them you don't actually, or it sort of recommends that you discard and buy a new one in terms of the battery, but some of them do also want you to have a battery change as well. And then, as I said, a slush test for your thermometer to check its accuracy needs to be completed at least every 12 months. And we want you to ensure that the batteries are changed at least every 6 to 12 months or more frequently if required. So if you have a vaccine delivery failure, so this is when the vaccines arrive to you from QIP. If you have a concern that it hasn't been packed appropriately or you think the vaccines have been outside of the recommended range, which would be indicated by your heat or freeze monitors, please don't use the vaccine, so you need to isolate them. You need to complete a vaccine delivery report form and email it through to QIP, and then they will be in contact with you with what to do. So if it's, as I said, a QIP delivery, it's not public health that you need to follow up with, it's QIP. But obviously, if you give us a call and you have a concern about your delivery, we can talk to you about the next steps to take. So some storage tips to help keep stable temperatures throughout your fridge cabinet. So it's really important not to overfill your fridge. You know, it needs adequate airflow to keep the temperatures stable. If you have only a few vaccines in your fridge at one time, you can consider adding some cooled bottles of water. You need to ensure that there's room between the walls, the fridge walls and the vaccines, again, for airflow. It is a good idea to keep the vaccines in the same place so that you're reducing the fridge opening times, the door opening. And as I said, if you had a solid door fridge, you could consider a map on the front door, on the front of the door. And also you may consider, particularly if your area is prone to losing power in storms, a backup generator or an uninterrupted power supply. Again, keep the door openings to a minimum. So we want you to take the whole box out, shut the door, remove the vaccine components that you need, and then put the box back in. If you have left the door open for a while, you might want to go and you notice the temperature going up. Obviously go and give your vaccination and then come back and check the min-max temperature and reset it if you need to. Vaccines shouldn't be left out of the fridge for any length of time, so don't prepare it until you're ready to give it. And all vaccines must be stored in their original packaging to help protect them from fluctuations in temperature and UV light. And we definitely recommend storing them in open weave containers. So we have definitely had calls from time to time about vaccines that are supplied by a community pharmacist. So it's really important at the time that the prescription is provided for a private vaccine that the doctor lets the patient know about the importance of the cold chain so that they can plan when they're going to fill the script and that they need to, bring it straight back to the surgery. And obviously to let them know to inform reception staff when they arrive so it can be refrigerated immediately. So cold chain breaches, I'm sure you're all aware, but just to cover it for anybody that might be new, a cold chain breach has occurred if the vaccines are exposed to temperatures outside of the recommended +2 to +8 degrees. So it doesn't include excursions up to 12 degrees for 15 minutes or less. For example, when you're restocking the fridge, you would just need to make sure that you're resetting your min-max thermometer if that happens and recording it on the troubleshooting chart as well. And really important, obviously, that any temperature below 2 is also reported. So all cold chain breaches must be reported to QIP. That's the Queensland Health Immunisation Program. So how do they occur? So they can be due to power outage, a fridge malfunction, a door being left open, a vaccine fridge being accidentally turned off or unplugged, or human errors such as overstocking of a vaccine fridge, or any delays in transport or delivery. So this was just a sort of a pie graph that I took of a vaccine management system. So when cold chain breaches are reported, we have a system where we can see all of the active ones. So this only showed open and active cold chain breaches at this particular point in time. But just to note, this is sort of in line with what we would see in terms of the cause of the cold chain breach. So we've got fridge malfunction and power failure and human error, sort of the most common causes of the cold chain breaches that we would consistently see. So if you do note that the temperature is out of range, you must take immediate action. And as I mentioned, we really want to stop any patients being given an ineffective vaccination. So you need to make sure that you isolate the vaccines, that you place a do not use sign on your vaccine fridge, and that you let all staff know that no vaccines can be used. And then you would report your cold chain breach to QIP. So to report a cold chain breach, you need to complete the cold chain breach reporting form, which is available online, and you need to email that through to QIP. QIP then notify us of the breach, and then we follow up and get some more information, and then we would request at least 48 hours of the data log readings or longer, depending on how long the breach went for. So with the data log readings, we want to clearly see the readings before the breach happened, the entire duration of the breach, and then for a period of time after, so that we know that the fridge is back in range and is working correctly again. We'll also ask you for your current min-max chart and potentially the min-max chart from the previous month. And then we also need to request the list of your current vaccines that you have. And you also need to indicate if you have any vaccines in your fridge from a previous cold chain breach. If you have any urgent inquiries or you have concerns that perhaps it's been, half a day and we haven't contacted you, please just give us a call. There's been very odd occasions where a cold chain breach has been reported, but it hasn't actually made its way through to us. So if you have concerns, you can give us a call. And definitely consider cancelling any immunisation appointments you have, definitely for that day, if not potentially for the next day as well. So really important that you have vaccine saving measures in place. So that will include your backup eskies and ice packs. And it's really important to make sure that you have enough eskies to be able to store the most amount of vaccines that you would have, which is probably during flu season, because obviously if you have a cold chain breach, we want you to be able to save all of those vaccines. And you need to be sure that you have enough ice packs for the amount of eskies that you have. As I mentioned, you need to have a portable min-max thermometer for each esky that you have in addition to each vaccine fridge. You may also consider some backup storage at pharmacies or like nearby pharmacies, hospitals, or any sister practices as well. And that's particularly important if you know that you've got a planned power outage happening. And as I mentioned earlier, consideration for a generator or an uninterrupted power supply. We never want you to transport any vaccines to another fridge or esky without any kind of temperature device to monitor them. So there's information in the Strive for 5 for how to pack an esky, and it's always good to practice it because sometimes in the middle of a cold chain breach, that's not when you want to find out that your eskies aren't big enough or that you don't have enough bubble wrap or ice packs. So 1 thermometer per esky. We really want you to make sure that you're keeping an accurate record of the temperature of the esky. So in the Strive for 5, there is a temperature chart that you can use, but even just a scrap piece of paper is fine. But if you do have multiple eskies, we want you to make sure that you make note of which vaccines are in which eskies. As I said earlier, some vaccines are more tolerant to heat or cold. So it's really important that we know which vaccines were at which temperatures. So you need to monitor and record the temperature every 15 minutes for the first 2 hours. And then if your temperatures are stable, you can go hourly. And it's also important to note that any freezing episodes would usually occur in the first 2 hours, particularly if you haven't had a sort of opportunity to condition your ice packs. So just to be really aware of that. I have included a video. I won't play it now, but it is a good video on how to pack a cooler as well. Oops, okay, I've got a low battery. Okay, so power failure, how to prepare. So there is a checklist in Appendix 9 as well for how to manage a power failure. And again, it talks about alternate vaccine storage as well. And then key recommendations. So we definitely want you to make sure that you're completing a vaccine storage self-audit every 12 months. And that's Appendix 2 in the Strive for 5. A self-audit is important in terms of quality assurance and risk management, and it allows staff to ensure they have confidence in providing safe and effective vaccines. So vaccine management protocols, all vaccine service providers must have a current VMP, and that's updated every 2 years. There has been a recent publication of a statewide VMP template to ensure its consistency across the state. So please use that version when you're completing your updates. It makes it a lot easier for public health to ensure that all the necessary components are in your VMP. And we can email that template as well. I'm not sure if it's available online. If you choose not to use that template, there is as well the Strive for 5 have a vaccine management protocol in Appendix 1. You just need to make sure that you include information about vaccine ordering and delivery, your temperature monitoring and recording, power failure and cold chain breach procedures, documentation, equipment maintenance, transporting of vaccines, and staff education. So just a reminder, if you're not already aware, that the Queensland Health Immunisation Program in collaboration with the Cunningham Centre have some online resources for staff training. So these are free. There is 4 courses in total. You get a certificate of completion at the end, and that can go towards your CPD hours as well. And I've just provided the link for how to access that. Obviously, if you have any questions or you're not sure, please just give us a call. We're always happy to help. And I think just some references, that's probably it for me, Amy. So hopefully I've made it on time. I'm actually going to quickly plug my computer in because it told me I had a low battery. And then I'll just see if there's anybody that's got questions currently.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if there's any. It doesn't sound like there's any questions, maybe.
Oh, sorry, there is. I was just waiting to make sure you were unlocked.
Well, yeah, look, I don't know. It appears that my computer is plugged in, but I'll just see. Hopefully, it won't die on me.
We have got 3 questions. First one's from Helen. I did see you touched on this earlier, but she asked, we often get vaccines brought in by patients from pharmacies. These are travel vaccines, not NIP. They are given to the patient in a silver bag. They take it home and pop it in their home fridge and then bring them to us to administer. I hate administering this type. Any advice?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess that's usually where we end up getting a call. It's really difficult to be able to determine if that vaccine stayed between 2 and 8 degrees, which is why we really would put the onus, I guess, on the prescribing doctor when they're writing that script. Or if you know that they're going to be filling a script for travel vaccines, if you just mention, hey, it's really important that you fill your script at the pharmacy and then bring your vaccine straight here. Please don't take it home, put it in your fridge. Please don't go shopping and leave it in the car for a couple of hours. I guess it's difficult as well because they've paid for it. And these are quite expensive vaccines, but ultimately, if there's any concern that it hasn't sort of gone from the pharmacy to a fridge, then we would probably recommend that you not administer it. You need to be happy and comfortable in knowing that the cold chain is being maintained. So I guess it's really trying to bring it back to the time that it's being prescribed, because often I think I would have thought as well that the pharmacy would let them know, but we can't always rely on that information as well. So certainly the responsibility of the prescribing doctor would be what I would be going back to make sure that your GPs are aware, to let patients know that. But again, if you've got any concerns about it, obviously if the vaccine feels warm, then I wouldn't be recommending administering it.
Karen has asked, with the temp recording, do we need separate charts for the inbuilt fridge temp and the battery-powered separate thermometer?
Look, I think it's really up to you. It's just important to note. So if you're using your inbuilt, for example, to note that it's the inbuilt, so that everybody's using the same temperature recording for that chart. If you had any concerns and you wanted to put your portable min-max in as well, then that's probably a good idea.
I think we might have lost Michelle. So guys, I have written down the questions that that are in the Q&A. So I'll get Michelle to answer all of those, and I'll get those answers out to you with the recording. So thanks for coming along, and yeah, I'll, as I said, forward the recording, copy of the slides and the answers to these questions, and in the next week or 2. Thanks for coming along, everyone.